Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. This is really an amazing turnout for a very important topic. I'm Emily Elias. I am the director of the USDA Climate Hub, and I want to welcome you to the New Mexico State University Climate Change Education Seminar Series featuring Dr. Gary Nabham. We, the Climate Hubs, are one of 10 hubs across the nation housed at USDA research laboratories. In our case, the Jornada Experimental Range, which is an agricultural research service unit working to understand the nuances of arid ecosystems and western rangelands for 108 years now. By contrast, the Climate Hub Network is a relatively new response to an emerging challenge. The network was formed 6 years ago to assist farmers, ranchers, foresters, natural resource managers, and communities in responding to the regional impacts of climate change. And we at the Southwest Climate Hub and the Jornada Experimental Range are delighted to sponsor this lecture about climate solutions from one of the foremost thought leaders working on desert food systems and climate resilience. Dr. Nabham, I'm sure as many of you know, is a renowned ethnobotanist and prolific author from the University of Arizona. And you saw as you came in, he has many of his books outside, out in the front, and he has agreed to sign them for you this evening. So if you would like him to sign one of the books, he'll do that. And this evening he will discuss the importance of a diverse, locally based food culture in helping communities meet the growing challenge of climate change. Dr. Nabham co-founded Native Seed Search, a nonprofit conservation organization aimed at preserving native southwestern agricultural plants. After serving as the director of conservation research and collections at both the Desert Botanical Garden and Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, Nabham became founding director of the Center for Sustainable Environments at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, before returning to the University of Arizona in Tucson as Kellogg Endowed Chair in Southwestern Borderlands Food and Water Security. This evening, Dr. Nabham will present Redesigning Desert Agriculture for Climate Change, Biomimicry, Nurse Plant Ecology, and Succulent Plants in a Hotter, Drier World. A presentation focused on rediversifying our desert food systems to increase community resilience in the face of climate change. This evening's talk is one of the first in the spring semester slate of 4 New Mexico State University Climate Change Education Seminar Series talks. The goal of the series is to highlight research and issues related to climate change for the region. And so I encourage you to pick up a flyer advertising the remaining 3 events in the spring semester. The next one will be February 12th. It's on climate security, threats and responses at home and abroad, and it'll be here at 7 o'clock. So with that, thank you, Dr. Nabham, for joining us.
I want to thank everyone who hosted me today, the Climate Hub folks, the radio station down the street here, my old friend Eric McGrain from, anyway, it's been a great day catching up on all the wonderful work being done here in Las Cruces, and I'm really grateful that so many of you support the great organizations that are in this community, and be proud of what you have here. It's really special. I want to say also that Tucson, where I've spent most of my adult life, and Las Cruces have so many things in common. And you'll see that one of my points here that I'll make several different ways is that we're on the front lines now. What we're going to be facing the next 20 years in terms of climate change nationally or across all of North America are conditions that people in southern New Mexico and southern Arizona have already been facing for some time. And so we're sort of a laboratory for what the rest of the continent will be facing in the future. And we need to step up and give positive, innovative examples for this, rather than sticking our heads in the sands out of White Sands National Monument and saying, everything's okay with our food system, everything's okay with agriculture here in the Southwest. We have some real challenges that we're facing, and just trying to say, well, talking about those things is embarrassing or it's disparaging farmers. In no way anything that I say tonight is disparaging the farmers or ranchers or for that matter, agricultural resources. But we need to open up the discussion to a broader portion of the public, because every one of you eats and every one of you makes choices that affect our food system. And so we need you all on board, and the incredible talent that we have in this room, in this community, of making the changes that will make this a better world to live in. So let's get started. I'm going to say a few outrageous things, just because it's always fun to go to another town and say outrageous things. You can't say but one of those is that within a short period, we'll be facing kinds of conditions, if we aren't already facing those conditions, that will mean that what we eat and how we grow our food will no longer look, taste, or feel like what we've been used to. And I love the traditions of the Southwest in terms of agricultural traditions and culinary traditions, but we're really at a turning point. And that's because some of the crops that we've been growing here, like pinto beans, are hitting their thermal thresholds. If it gets any hotter when they're in flowering, we're just going to have floral abortion and no beans set on the plants. And a number of crop plants that are long part of our traditions here are hitting those thresholds. And so I think it's really important to say that agriculture in the future is not going to look like anything that we know today, just like when New Mexico became a state. If those people were to be vaulted into a time machine and see how we're growing things now and see what Las Cruces looks like now, they'd say, I don't recognize the place. That's going to happen with our agriculture and our food systems in short order here. And that doesn't mean that anyone did anything wrong or is a failure. It just means that we have to step up to the plate to new challenges. So we live not just in the borderlands, if you want to call it that, but an area that has 9,000 years of plant knowledge and about 4,500 to 5,000 years of agricultural knowledge embedded here in living communities, whether you call them indigenous or mestizo or indigenous and Hispano, whatever you call them. There's a living tradition of how to deal with the desert here that is a kind of knowledge that can be an ally and a complement to scientific knowledge. And we need to draw on both of those because of the kinds of conditions that we'll soon be facing and that we're already facing with climate uncertainty every once in a while now, like we did in 2010 and 2011 with catastrophic drought and kill of over 1 million cattle in the border states, and crop failures of a number of different kinds of crops. So we're really part of arid America, and the other message that I have for you that's a broad one tonight is that we need to learn from the farmers and ranchers south of the border just as we need to learn from the ones who figured out things here north of the border. We're one bioregion, arid America, that has solutions that other people may need as the world changes to hotter and drier conditions. And I value our neighbors south of the border for having figured out things at a scale that we may not have. And we need to open up the dialogue. We're probably at the point in American history where there's more divisiveness in this country than at any time since the Civil War 150 years ago. And to solve the problems that we are currently facing, it doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican, left or right, a faith-based person or a scientific-based person or both, we need to work together to solve these problems. This is a huge challenge. And just like FDR brought people together for the the New Deal and the Federal Workers Project and all of that. We need initiatives on that scale that bring people together to solve common problems rather than drawing the line with our neighbors and saying, you don't believe the same way I do and I don't want to help you. So part of my latest book, Food from the Radical Center, is how we use this restorative work to get our food system back alive and running and resilient, how that can bring more of us together when we see the knowledge and talent of other people who may believe differently than our own but still have something to offer us. And so those are serious challenges that I'm putting up there. Salinity, drought, high solar radiation that are already mean that a number of crops that have been mainstays in this region for decades are hitting the wall with. Many of you may not know it, but after the reservoirs just north of here went down to 3% of their water level, we had the highest number of new wells drilled in southern New Mexico and West Texas of any period in human history. And a lot of those wells on the eastern edge of the state and into West Texas are now going dry. This is something that we simply can't expect our aquifers to recover from within our own lifetimes. So these are really, really serious issues that we have to daylight and then do positive problem solving. I'm not critiquing anyone, I'm just saying, let's face the problems and collectively find solutions that none of us could have come on their own. And here's another indication of how much things have changed. I showed this to a class a couple of weeks ago in Arizona, and they said, wow, do you mean climate change is even changing the colors of different states? and look how close Alaska is moving to continental 48 states. That's really amazing. I didn't know. And it looks like the Hawaiian Islands have turned into Puerto Rico. Anyway, the point here is that the plant hardiness zones that we have are radically shifting, that the number of frost-free days, most intense heats, that all the things that indicate the optimum conditions for growing different kinds of plants are shifting before our eyes. And obviously the last one here was 2015, and I bet as much as that changed over 15 years, we're about ready for another USDA plant hardiness zone map to guide farmers and horticulturalists that will change just as radically in the last 5 to 6 years as what we've seen in that 15-year period. So these stresses that I'm talking about largely in terms of affecting crop plants like pinto beans or chili peppers or alfalfa or whatever large-scale crop you want to name, are also affecting the well-being and economic prosperity of farmers, are going into debt more than ever before, and the health of everyone else in our food system. And that's why these decisions can't merely be made by agricultural scientists and farmers about what we should be growing and how we should be doing that, but they need community support for making these changes. And some of these things are going to affect the quality and diversity of food that are come to our plates. And they're going to have health effects that are really dramatic. And it's not that those negative health effects are all caused by climate change. It's that climate change is exacerbating a certain set of nutrition-related diseases and heat-related diseases that public health scientists are now lumping together as diseases of oxidative stress. Livestock scientists actually use that term before public health scientists did. We need to put other things in those salt blocks that are antioxidants that reduce the stress loads, heat stress and dehydration stress on our cattle. We're seeing that more attention is being given not to antioxidant capsules that can move the needle a little bit, but the antioxidants in our diets overall and in the diets of our livestock, because we're facing such unprecedented heat levels that in many cities like Phoenix, emergency rooms are just overfilled all summer long by people coming in with heat and dehydration-related diseases. There's been a spike, especially among outdoor workers, landscapers, farm workers, of emergency room visits, and the cost of caring for these heat-related stressors on elderly people and on our smallest children is dramatic. These people have no slack. If they get dehydrated, they go down. So we really have to take these things seriously. And it's not like we don't already have problems. Just this last summer, New Mexico, I think, finally beat Arizona and Mississippi out. Or I forget which states were considered the worst. I hate words like that, but I'm just trying to bring home to you, not anything to disparage New Mexico, but 5 or 6 states are generally ranked in this cluster of having such high childhood hunger and food insecurity that the cost of dealing with these problems in terms of human cost of reduced activity of the children and all of that is really affecting our entire culture, our entire communities. And that these things carry over to adults too. So the food insecurity issues in Arizona and New Mexico are not going away unless we give it much more attention than we ever had in the past. We have some great food banks and food relief programs, but we have to go beyond food relief, where we honor food banks for the number of people that they feed, and we deal with reducing that hunger gap by saying that we're so successful that those lines are getting shorter and shorter in front of food banks. So I'm not saying that climate change is the direct cause of all these diseases, kidney disease, heart disease, diabetes. I'm saying that they are exacerbated by the multiple effects of climate change on human health. And because we're already in dire straits, we really have to pay attention to these additional factors that are worsening the public health care of all of these. And so, in another way, we can no longer say that climate change and obesity and diabetes and these other nutrition-related diseases are entirely unrelated. We always used to think of them as 2 different silos, and now more and more science is showing that, especially for things like kidney disease, the root causes are one and the same. Poverty, climate change, and the ability to have resilience because of poverty in response to these stresses. At the same time, I'm just going to do some bad news about your state, and I could give you even more bad news about my state because I'm much closer to it and think about it all the time. We have remarkable innovations going on in New Mexico that people nationally have been paying attention to for 20 or 30 years. I happen to have one of the Kellogg Endowed chairs for food security that are spread all across the country. And that group loves to meet in New Mexico because they see so many innovations from Taos down to Cruces and Anthony. And I need to do a shout out for my friends at La Semilla Food Center, who I just think are exemplary in the way their leadership team really listens to communities, their needs, and comes up with pragmatic solutions to the kinds of daunting problems we're facing. So in addition to the book signing after the reading, the La Semilla team is going to be over on this side of the stage with some little $5 publications that we do on special topics that are part of this talk. And you can take them for free, or you can give a donation for the publications, but all those proceeds go to La Semilla. They're taking whatever you offer for those publications in this corner after the talk back to help their programs. So I just want to say you have one of the best and most dynamic organizations here of anyone in the whole country. So thank you for supporting La Semilla. There's other things. 5 years ago, two of my old friends, one of whom's passed away since then, Peter Warshall and Artie Mangan, worked on this Dreaming New Mexico program to sort of map some of the issues in the New Mexico food system and then work with the New Mexico Food Policy Council on resolutions to deal with them. And then more recently, I think the Mesa Valley Food Policy Council is taking these on at a local level. This is the kind of thing that we need everywhere, and a lot of our counties still don't have such programs. So if we say, here's all this human capital, these incredibly talented, ethically motivated community organizations that are now passing on to the age where they're running for office and changing policy and all of that. How do we not only support them, but work on the other remaining issues in our food system? And what I think we need in the Southwest that we can achieve is what I would call a slow agriculture that produces slow, healthy food and uses slow money investments that bring a return on investment on a decadal scale. We may be growing plants like prickly pear or century plant agaves or mesquite trees that take 10 years to mature, but the amount of edible biomass that helps solve our health problems rather than exacerbate them is more over a 10-year basis than we would get from most of the commodity crops we're now growing that use less or that use more water, more energy, and more tillage to produce them than these desert-adapted perennials that I just mentioned, the genus agave, opuntia, and chrysoprase century plants, prickly pears, and mesquite. And the irony is, we know we need change in our food system, but no one that I know of has ever explicitly designed an agricultural system, either a field or a whole food system, that simultaneously tries to achieve 3 goals at the same time. One is agroecological health, that the land itself improves in its capacity to feed people through time. The yields become more stable. You have more pollinators and soil microbes and all those lovely things. But at the same time, it says we want to grow crops that help us with our physical human health issues so that diabetes is reduced, heart disease is reduced. We're intentionally selecting crops that have high nutritional density, increase and enrich the gut microbes in our GI tracts. And the third goal is trying to deal with the economic well-being or the disparities that keep everyone from achieving economic well-being in our communities. I'm not talking just merely about the 1% against the rest of us. I'm saying there's all kinds of disparities here, even between border counties in the United States and the rest of our states. There's double the poverty in the border counties of Arizona, New Mexico, California, and Texas compared to the average income and levels of food security in the rest of those states. We need to deal with those disparities. And we need to work on all 3 of those problems at the same time with solutions that then reinforce each other. So dealing with land health, human health, and economic well-being, rather than designing a food system with our blinkers on that deals with one of those problems, but not the other 2. And why am I saying that? In Arizona, we have great farmers and ranchers that do wonderful work. But think about this, the collateral damage from an unhealthy food system overall, that means the food that comes into the state as well as what's grown in the state. The cost of treating people for diabetes and obesity alone in Arizona is more than all the farmers and ranchers make for a living in terms of their farm gate income. So our collateral damage is a greater cost than the benefits that our communities are receiving from the good food that our farmers and ranchers grow. When the collateral damage has a greater effect on our health than the good things that our farmers and ranchers are putting in, there's one conclusion: it's time for a change. And we have to take this on seriously. So that collateral damage means that we have to take a longer view. We have to decide the goals of agriculture and food systems in a much larger context than we have ever done before. And so the whole point here is that we've targeted crops for higher yields, sometimes more stable yields, sometimes particular nutrients, sometimes greater heat or drought tolerance, and we've tried to get our irrigation efficiencies up, and we're making incremental changes that improve our agricultural system, but we need a quantum jump in how those things are integrated into longer term solutions that reach more and more people. Yield alone is probably a crappy indicator of a food system's value to society. We have to have other factors in the discussion. So this is like way too complicated for you all to digest this late in the day. But the point is, these are some of the ways that we can say, well, you know what? This isn't that hard, because there are issues that have parallels in bringing land back to a healthy state, with bringing human bodies back to a healthy state, with bringing community economies back to a healthy state. You know, so with land health, we know that we need more microbes in the soil, and a certain soil microbiologist, one here back in one of those back rows, is one of the great solution builders in our country right now. So I'm not going to name names, but thank you, Dr. Johnson. But we also need to know that antibiotics have killed off most of our gut microbiota, and we're now suffering from an epidemic of absence of beneficial microbes relative to the problems of deleterious or damaging microbes that were major health problems for our grandparents. Now we have more health problems from an absence of good microbes in our gut, and that's why we have all this promotion of probiotics and prebiotics. That's parallel to the issues of soil health, and more people are saying it's not just, you know, the human body or the tree's body that we need to look at. We need to look at what's going on with those microbes. So this is the kind of thinking that we have to train all new food and agriculture scientists to think about, to come to more lasting solutions in the face of climate change. So how do we get from point A to point B? Once we've identified the problems and potential solutions, how do we start the assembly of new agricultural systems and larger food systems? Collaborating with people up at Arizona State University at a Biomimicry Institute, is that we're using models from natural desert ecosystems, like what permaculturalists and desert ecologists call nurse plant guilds, where we're seeing how various parts are assembled into a cohesive unit that produces more food on an even basis through time than if we grew those plants separately. It's an idea that's called polycultures, intercropping, or whatever. But in fact, it goes back to models in nature and in indigenous agriculture, like growing coffee and chocolate under leguminous tree crops called madre cacao. The mother of chocolate is now the major shade-producing canopy for both chocolate and coffee in the tropics. People observe that role for the madre cacao trees in nature, and then said, oh, the leaves of our chocolate plant are getting burnt. Why don't we grow them under these madre cacao trees like we see them in nature, and maybe their productivity will go up and the solar radiation burn and the heat stress will go down. And in fact, that's how we have, I think, the most economically important agroforestry system in the world, growing shade raised coffee and chocolate under these nurse plants. Desert indigenous people in the Sonoran and Chihuahuan Desert recognize mesquite, ironwood, palo verde, and several other legumes as doing the same thing for cacti, wild chilies like the one that the New Mexico Chili Institute has promoted, like the chiltepine or chili piquin. Those need nurse plants. And there's a whole set of other plants that grow better with higher yields, more stable yields, more nutrient density if grown under nurse plants than not. So we take an idea from desert ecology. We do pilot projects to adapt growing prickly pear or chiltepines or both of them under mesquite trees or ironwood trees or palo verdes or other like acacias, huizache, a common plant like mesquite in the Chihuahuan Desert. And then we say, and how can we use that same thing with modern technologies? Because we don't expect all farmers to give up their other technologies just to have a completely plant-based kind of agriculture. So now we have 4 pilot projects in the Tucson area, one at Biosphere 2 that about 150,000 people see every year, where we're growing those same understory crops that are sensitive to light, wild chilies, stevia, basil, oregano, under photovoltaic solar collectors on high stilts. Tractors can move under them and out the other side. But with 40% less solar radiation on their plants, there's less heat stress, the yields of the crops double. They are more efficient in water use. We're collecting water off the solar panels and putting it in drip systems, in micro-aspersion systems, so that the plants get the water at the key times of the day when they need it the most. And so our yields have gone up, and we're co-locating renewable energy, renewable or restorative agriculture, and water harvesting on the same piece of land. And now in many places in California and northern Mexico, solar collectors are actually replacing agriculture. And tens of thousands of acres of solar collectors are going in with Chinese technologies, and we're losing the food producing capacity of that land. Why not co-locate them for the benefit of the plants, the energy production, and by the way, the farm workers who are then harvesting these things in the shade of the solar collectors rather than being out in 120-degree weather in the Imperial Valley or in the Mexicali area. So we now have 4 pilot projects like this in Tucson that you're welcome to see. 3 are at schools. The kids are learning science, engineering, math, and technology through these plots, comparing them with the same plants grown in open environments. And we're now gearing up to have a 4-acre plot of solar collectors with food production underneath them. So this is an example of going from a little pilot project with 1 solar collector like you see on this side of the screen, and going to larger systems at Biosphere 2 with controls outside growing the same plants where we can really compare their dynamics. And so this is taking that idea of biomimicry, looking at how the desert functions, and using a combination of adapted plants and technologies to come to new solutions. This is, I'm insistent on this point because most people think I'm a Luddite, that I'd like to go back to carving my own wooden wheels for my car if I could. I just want to show I'm not opposed to all technologies. I like that in my can opener. So this is what these look like if we spread them out. We do on floodplains the solar collecting panels over quick growing annuals and perennial herb crops like oregano and all of these things. We're focusing on the plants that can help prevent or manage diabetes in particular. And then on the hillsides, we do alley cropping or intercropping of columnar cacti, prickly pear, agaves, the acacia trees and mesquitas, nitrogen fixers, and we collect water in a reservoir, pump it up to tanks on the top of the hill, and then let that feed by solar pumping up to the top of the hill off this energy made from the solar panels, all the water needs of all those plants. And where we've done this so far, we've halved the water consumption of these plants. So we just did a paper that we finished last week of screening about 200 desert plants for their potential as new food crops, rather than looking at the things that we've already domesticated and as crops like cotton and squashes and things, and say, let's move them 3 or 4% towards more water use efficiency. We said, why don't we start with the most water use efficient plants in the world, and then see how we can enhance their food crop products. So it's completely ass backwards compared to the way most ag scientists think that I do everything ass backwards, so there's no big jump for me. The point is that we're starting with plants that have 8 to 20 times the water use efficiency in terms of producing yield on a decadal scale, which is how most orchard crops are anyway, than our conventional C3 and C4 crops, which are our tropical grasses and most of our vegetables. These plants all have multiple adaptations, not just a single thing like little leaves or oily leaves. They have multiple adaptations to reduce heat and solar radiation stress. Many are salt tolerant. Some can be nurse plants, some grow best as underlings, and all of them have high carbon sequestration. So their root biomass is really going down deep and producing and accumulating carbon over time. At the same time, they're producing nutrient-dense foods with these aromatic oils like the ones in oreganos and chilies that are chemopreventive. They help reduce heart disease, cholesterol, blood sugar levels. Many of them can be used like cactus fruit as prebiotics or probiotic beverages, and they're producing a lot of services like nitrogen fixation or soil salinity reduction in the fields where they grow. And we can do multiple value-added timber, non-timber products from these, not just the food themselves, but fuel wood, wood for crafts, a whole bunch of other things, medicinal plants that I won't go into. So 37 genera, that's about 100 species of plants that are native to the Sonoran Desert and Chihuahuan Desert that we think that we could bring into production within the next 10 years, or they're already in production at some place between California and Texas and Guadalajara and Mexico City. And most of this, frankly, is being done successfully south of the border, and we haven't been paying attention to it. So let's look at some of that. It means going out, evaluating these things in their natural habitats, and then seeing what changes when you bring them into cultivation. Is there more of a probability of disease or pest? Probably if you put them in higher densities in a monocrop. But how about if we put them in agroforestry systems? Is that disease level still high? So we really need universities that have the flexibility and the interdisciplinary capacity of New Mexico State and the Jornada Range to take this kind of new crop research on, because we've lost a lot of the other things that used to do this kind of work, like the Soil Conservation Service Plant Material Center up in Los Lunas, or the one in Tucson. During World War II, the one in Tucson had 500 scientists and about 1,000 federal worker project people planting windbreaks in hedgerows and nurseries all over Arizona and New Mexico, and putting hedgerows and windbreaks on every single farm and ranch. Today there's 3 people working at that plant material center. Los Lunas, when someone retires, they don't reopen that position. So we need to talk our policymakers into reinvesting in these kinds of centers in New Mexico, because again, you're the laboratory of the future for conditions that farmers across this country are going to face. So believe it or not, this picture closest to me is a field. Those are rows of prickly pear, columnar cactus that produce gorgeous fruit like dragon fruit, if you've ever seen those in high-end markets. The fruits go for $3 to $5 each fruit. Absolutely delicious. And agaves that make not just mezcal and tequila, but can be roasted for not the agave nectar that's really just like high fructose corn syrup, but a number of food products that actually reduce blood sugar levels in people who have diabetes. These foods are already all over Europe, and very few of them have reached the United States. They're all over Mexico too. And what we're saying is that we need to both deal with those native desert plants and take another look at things like pineapple to see that's one of the few commercial crops that has this crassulacean acid metabolism that's a water use efficient, and bring those into other settings with new varieties and new cropping systems, including putting them in nurse plants. And so there's only one arid land plant resource center that the whole USDA funds, and it's way the hell up north between Fresno and Davis, California. It gets hot there. It's less than 20 inches of rainfall, but we need that kind of research program down here on the front lines of climate change, where we have the plants, hundreds of species of wild relatives of crops within 100 miles of here, where we can study them in situ in their habitat and then ex situ. The things that Rich Pratt and I collected are peppery beans and wild gourds and devil's claw and things for that center in the 1970s just were de-accessioned and abandoned by the USDA because they didn't have the staffing to throw them out every few years. So we had arid land plant collections in the USDA, and we've let most of them go, and we have to rebuild those. So that does not look like agriculture to most people, and this does not look like food to most people until you try it and then you're completely won over. Let me just go through this. This is baking agaves for food. I tasted these when they came out of a roasting pit that had about 3 tons of agaves being roasted on the same day. There's about 15 mesquite grinding hammer mills in Arizona, another 5 in Sonora, and we're making mesquite tortillas, mesquite corn chips, and a mesquite beverage named for the Seri Indian people who call themselves a Conca, that we made a label that says Conca-Cola, and in English it would be translated as less sugar, more supernatural power. There's no sugar added. It tastes sweet, but it lowers blood sugar. And now 8-ounce bottles with that label are arranged in the 2 Seri Indian villages where about 800 people have an ancient tradition of using mesquite. It's become one of the most popular beverages there. And then that's a ponche de pitaya, cactus fruit punch that again people are drinking rather than carbonated soft beverages with a lot of high fructose corn syrup. And here's a woman making mesquite tortillas. A friend of mine, Esperanza Arevalo in Tucson, I met on a street corner where she was selling her mother's tortillas when she lost her job. Now she has 6 people working for her. They do about 300 dozen of mesquite tortillas a week. And they sell them to diabetes clinics, other people with diabetes, in 5 farmers markets in southern Arizona, and have about a dozen different products with mesquite that they sell. So this is micro-entrepreneurs doing remarkable things. And these things have been in the desert dietary here in Las Cruces, El Paso, Tucson, Hermosillo, Chihuahua City for over 6,000 years. They have complete acceptability. They're delicious. They're not weirdo foods. To make the point that this is not only acceptable in a gastronomic or culinary sense, but makes good economic sense, is that since Tucson received a United Nations designation as the first city of food cultures or gastronomy in the United States in, I think, 2005, 2006. 40 new micro-enterprises using these cactus products, mesquite products, peppery beans, wild chilies, have emerged in Tucson. 40 new micro-enterprises that have about 140 new products. We even have a mesquite smoked whiskey. I'm not saying that's good for diabetes, I'm just saying that's good for micro-enterprise development. And 2,000 new jobs since 2015 have emerged in our food sector because of this designation and the renewed interest in these foods. 2,000 new jobs when Tucson fell off the map. It was one of the poorest cities in the entire country with over 1 million people. So these can help us recover the food economy of a community that then helps us recover the overall economy. And with that, I just want to remind you that these are good for things other than people, that when we grow agaves and columnar cactus like the saguaros here, 80-year-old saguaros that someone planted 200 Alphabet saguaro from near New River, Arizona 70 years ago, that it brings endangered species like lesser long-nosed bats back. And I'm working with a project of the Searle Foundation on bat-friendly mezcal and tequila so that you don't have to feel guilty when you have a little sip of something spicy to drink in the evening. We need a new Green Deal for the Southwest, and I think that new Green Deal is going to be mesquite flavored. The ranchers need mesquite on their raised lands because it's the only thing the cows can eat during drought so that they don't have to sell off their herds. People need them to deal with diabetes and cholesterol, and the land needs them for their nitrogen fixing and carbon sequestration capacity. So there's copies of this mesquite manifesto in Spanish and English that the La Semilla Food Center people will have over in this corner that lays out a whole plan for 6 training centers along the border, hopefully one in Las Cruces, where we treat people how to do beautiful mesquite wood guitars. Master guitar makers selling these guitars for $2,000 or $3,000. Mesquite pod flower, this old guy that I'm with here, 82 years of age, does a mesquite wine and a mesquite flavored mezcal. And that's our hammer mill where friends are putting mesquite pods in to make mesquite flour that are now in coffees, beers, soft drink beverages, and many other products in Tucson, about 50 mesquite products altogether every year. So my final words are the simplest ones. There's wisdom in the desert that we need to draw on, wisdom in desert communities and cultures that we need to draw on if we're going to weather the changes that are coming with climate disruptions. I'm not at all pessimistic. I think climate change is calling us to join forces, bring our creativity together, and enjoy these delicious foods and beverages while we're making the land healthier, our bodies healthier, and our communities more vigorous again. Thank you very much.